Tom, would you mind commenting on the recording aspect of this based on the topic?
Absolutely, sure. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity and risk management despite budget shortfalls and declining budgets. Given the topic, we do record our meetups. I want to make sure everybody understands that. And just, given that and given the topic, just be careful what you're disclosing, etc. But that's up to you, whatever your comfort level is. I know we're all professionals here, but just wanted to make sure everyone was aware. And of course, if there's anything sensitive that we'd like to talk about, I'm sure we can facilitate communication after the meetup itself.
Yes, so again, if you go to comment or question, make sure that you're not giving away your institutional secrets because this will be recorded. Again, the whole purpose of this is to talk about security. What are the risk factors? How are you maintaining security when we're in this COVID situation, as well as maybe your budget? How does your budget affect you? I know from my perspective, we are a small institution. We only have about 1,000 students a year. So I don't have the budget as any bigger institution would. And due to COVID, my budget is even more stricter this past year. So I'd be curious to see what some of you are doing and how you're handling it. With that said, I did mention I'd like to ask some questions in form of a poll, and Tom has been kind enough to create one. So before we start, I'm just going to give you folks a minute or two to answer the poll, and then I'm gonna actually ask questions of. Actually, Stephen, I see you're online, so I think I'll start with questions with you after the poll's been answered. I myself have only been in cybersecurity for 9 years. So I fall within the 6 to 10 years. It's interesting that folks are in the 1 to 3 years. So I'd be curious at some point how you entered that. But with that said, I'd be curious to see what your takeaway is at the end of this based on the questions and the answers. And I think that's a good segue to ask you, Stephen, based on what you've been dealing with at your institution, especially where a good chunk of people are remote, what is the biggest cybersecurity threat that you have been trying to handle?
It's basically that, dealing with people who are remote. When COVID struck a year ago, it's funny, it's been a year and a week now, we went to remote instruction for the rest of the semester. A large number of our faculty really weren't trained on how to access what they needed to do remotely because most of them work from their offices on campus. And so that became, we did a very accelerated training. Everybody show up in a socially distanced space in a room with your brand new laptop, and here's how you access the VPN, here's how you access all the solutions that we have. We don't have right now, and although we were talking about it a year ago, it didn't get implemented. We were pursuing a single sign-on solution, which we've re-engaged the vendor now. And so we basically lived the last year of multiple points of access, multiple login ID kind of model for a lot of our staff and faculty. We have put some additional provisions in place around some of our riskier systems, our financial system, but it's a smaller community of people that actually have to access it. So, but the college really isn't designed to have a wholly remote faculty and staff and students. But we came back in the fall and had on campus everything. We still had a large number of people working remotely. And then we were on campus here this spring. Because of an increased positivity rate, we've actually extended, we sent everybody home yesterday for an extended spring break to try to get people to calm down and do the right thing and live correctly and not create a problem for the campus. With respect to the other stuff, I mean, nothing really changed with respect to the cybersecurity program we had in place, which was really more habit-based, I tried to start implementing in force, 2 years ago. So much of that could still be done remotely without any issue. But the biggest constraint that we had, and it was a problem that we had with, again, not revealing too much, our legacy firewall infrastructure really wasn't designed for the load that it got all of a sudden. We had plans to replace that this coming summer, but what we did is over winter break, we replaced it with something that actually would support the load that was needed. So
Yeah, I want to say that's what we ended up doing at our institution. We found that our firewall was incapable of handling the increased bandwidth. So we had to increase the bandwidth overall and swap out a little bit earlier than intended. But when you were dealing with your remote users, I'm assuming, as we all do, we don't have administrative rights to our devices. Did you change up at all to with your antivirus, or reevaluate that whole antivirus combination with anti-Trojan apps to protect them from using their work laptop while looking at a link within Facebook during break, et cetera, and facing what consequences that would do?
we didn't make any changes to that. We had implemented, if people aren't familiar, we implemented Great Horn last fall, as most of our issues came in, sort of spear phishing and other phishing activities came in via email. We being in a weird thing, having a monastery attached to our college and having some very, very trusting monks, I've had to sit down and educate them about, no, there's nobody in another country that needs your money. And no, I mean, the whole list of things, the things that we think are silly, but as a general rule, monks tend to be very trusting individuals, and they trust what comes in their inbox, which is a behavior change that we have to continually reinforce. We didn't make any changes with respect to that, partially because we felt that we had and again, if people, I'm not trying to advertise Great Horn, I think it's a very good product for a very good price, and it probably eliminates 95% of the mail-based threats that we've been getting, which is a good thing.
Okay. Did you didn't change anything, but was that due to any budgetary constraints due to COVID because of students no longer staying on campus? So
it was a budgetary constraint because of our staffing. I think what most people will say is their staff focus, all their IT staff focus shifted very quickly to supporting a lot of things that we wouldn't necessarily have to support. Again, we were planning to put in a universal directory and identity single sign-on multi-factor authentication solution that's unified, as opposed to a set of one-off solutions. We were planning to kickstart that project last March. The whole thing was delayed. We contemplated doing it over the summer, but then we realized we were completely focused on, because we had decided to bring students back to campus for the fall, that was the focus of our efforts, was getting the campus again ready for in-person instruction in a socially distanced. It was an enormous amount of work, basically creating streaming enabled classrooms for hybrid classes where you have half present in the room, half remote, and then turning some of our larger spaces, a hockey arena, a really large auditorium, multiple large auditoriums, and some large outdoor tent spaces into classrooms with technology. That became our focus. So there really wasn't time to do anything else.
All right, I'm going to ask you this question, but this question also be curious to those who are also muted right now. I'd be curious. So how much aware, obviously in your position, cybersecurity is always on the back burner. It's like it's always there. It's the low fire, always kind of running. Same with me. But how much of it from the remote users do you think they think about it, or do you think it's running at a level where you're safely calm during the day, knowing that things are implemented with those people not really paying attention to it? How much of the awareness do you think there is?
The users,
Yeah.
they don't get it.
Yeah.
Catherine is shaking her head. I don't know who Catherine is, but yes, they don't get it.
Catherine, do you want to make a little comment? What are you dealing with?
Well, it's a good day for me when it's only at a low burn. It's when my hair is not on fire, I consider it a good day. I've been pleased with the level of acknowledgement of cybersecurity issues from my executive administration. There are several senior administrators who get it. Now, these expressions of getting it and support are not always accompanied with funding. But dealing with the user base, the couple tens of thousands of end users that my relatively small team supports, that's the challenge. COVID forced us to accelerate several initiatives that we had planned on rolling out over time just to be able to support the remote users appropriately. I mean, almost all of our systems naively assumed that this device that I'm managing is on the campus network. And when suddenly anywhere from a third to a half of them fled the buildings and were connecting from who knows where, we had to do some rapid pivots to retool infrastructure and enable some cloud services that let us still manage and take care of that device remotely. Changes that I consider no-brainer common sense, like we now withhold all attachments until they've gone through a detonation chamber. And then if they're clean, we reattach them to the email. Oh, people lost their minds over having to wait a couple of minutes for an attachment. Apparently, a common business process is for two people to collaborate on a spreadsheet by rapidly emailing it back and forth to each other, as opposed to just firing up Excel online and editing it together. So it's or Google Sheets or more modern ways of attacking that. Yeah, the users don't get it. They click on everything and are remarkably resistant to phishing training.
So that was going to be actually a nice segue on that. And by the way, before I move on, Catherine, and where do you work, and what is your role?
I'm at the University of Louisville. I'm the executive director of enterprise technology services. So I have both cybersecurity and our help desk rolling up to me.
Very good. Thank you.
So I hear what the users are telling our help desk agents.
And I apologize. I forgot to introduce myself. I know people probably heard my name, Jen. So my name is James Stoffel. I'm actually the director of technology at Showa Boston Institute. It's a nonprofit ESL college for Japanese students. It's 40 acres. No one knows it's there. It's a great campus. But with that said, one of the things, like you segued, is the phishing. So Stephen, as you mentioned, and Catherine, as you mentioned, it's that education of clicking on any email and how it goes. So we've actually built an in-house just to test out the concept to see if it's even viable of users actually responding. And it was unique in that they clicked on everything. So I'm just curious about any phishing campaigns that you've done and how has that changed the mindset of both how you're trying to make cybersecurity more aware, both at this is a two-part question, both at the user level, but also at the C level, where your executives sometimes, in most cases, really don't understand the complexity of the technology being used, let alone what your true job is. Like they see you touch the keyboard, but they don't realize you're managing, hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment to keep everybody safe.
Do you mind if I start there since I initiated the segue?
Sure.
Our first forays into phishing training, I'm going to call a failure because we didn't do a good enough job of explaining in advance that what we were going to be doing and what we were going to be using the data for. And a lot of employees who clicked the link and they were worried that there was going to be a job action or that there was that this was somehow seriously negative. It was a gotcha game that IT was playing with them. And the outcry through our shared governance system set back our phishing training by quite a bit. And then when COVID hit, we had so many other things we needed to be doing, we left it on the back burner. So it's now that we're beginning to return, we're looking at being back on campus this fall. We've been largely hybrid for the last 2 semesters. It's back on my front burner to make happen throughout the next academic year. In terms of my C-level executives, I'm actually really pleased with mine. Our president personally asked for a cybersecurity briefing, and that kind of floored me. I'm glad she gave me a month to prepare for it. And we have a brand new provost who starts next week. And her first meeting with me, phishing awareness was the first question she wanted to discuss. So I'm actually really pleased with my C-level. I just need to pivot out of emergency operations and get back into doing more of the, okay, this is how we do IT security, just the regular hygiene stuff, so we can start addressing that phishing training once again.
You had I would say we've had a similar thing at the C level, which I think is I've been surprised at. But part of that has been multiple years of conversations with them, kind of brutal conversations about actual events that have happened at this college, and with names attached, and on this date this person received this, and this is what they did, and this is what happened, and it's sort of instilling in the fact that everybody at that meeting is a target. And I don't think they're told often enough that they are targets, right? Their name, their image, what they do, their dog's name, their wife's name, their kid's name, all that information is out there. We had a situation out at this institution, my last one, where a pretty sophisticated phishing situation occurred with the people in finance. And it was this same stupid thing. I need you to FedWire, you need to wire some money somewhere. And we realized then that there was a level of other targets that needed better education. And it started along the lines of, if the president doesn't know your name, doesn't know you personally, he's never going to ask you to do something because he doesn't know who you are. So if the president sends you an email asking you to wire money somewhere, you need to realize 2 things. 1, the president doesn't know who you are. Number 2, the CFO's office is right next to the president's office. Why wouldn't he go to him instead of you? And but again, the education side is critically important, simply because no matter what technology we put in place, it's always backwards looking at the vectors that occurred last week, not the ones that are occurring this week. And so that's the last mile is the distance between the brain and the keyboard or the mouse.
Well, this question is, I'll ask you, Stephen, then Catherine, since you've been both, I'd like to hear your response. And then anybody else from this is, how often are you having a cyber awareness seminar, for lack of a phrase, with your staff, whether you're having them all show up at a hall doing a presentation to show them samples of what phishing emails look like, versus them, every quarter having them watch a PowerPoint or watch a video or anything to that effect? Stephen?
In the past year, we've had none, simply because it's been chaos.
Yeah, we'll say pre-COVID.
We would have one a year.
Okay.
Which isn't enough, but at the same time.
Yeah, dead on in my end. We've only had pre-COVID, we had once a year. And Catherine?
We are we're a large-ish institution, so no getting everybody in the same room on it. But pre-COVID, you got a cybersecurity briefing when you were onboarded. And depending on what sort of job you had, you might have subsequent trainings at regular intervals. But your average administrative and clerical employee probably never got anything prior to, subsequent to that initial onboarding presentation. We've identified that as a gap. We didn't do anything about it during COVID because other priorities. We have, pardon me, we have begun the process of integrating an annual cybersecurity certification in with our conflict of interest certification process that every employee has to complete as part of keeping all of our federal granting authorities happy. So we're back on track to having an annual cybersecurity training for everyone on campus. And then we're looking at what enhanced trainings should go along with that general knowledge training. Phishing is the one we're going to have to focus on again.
Okay.
It's gotten really bad.
Anybody else? Yeah, Elmar, go ahead. Oh, you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, James, it's interesting to me that so far the conversation is focused exclusively on people and people behavior and not on implementing technologies. I think that might be an interesting question at this point in time.
Well, how many people are using, and Stephen, I'll start with you, are using technology as the root defense versus education?
So if you sort of separate the technologies into different groups, we have I think Catherine used the word hygiene. I use the word habit of, we have a daily, weekly, monthly process of, vulnerability scanning and blah, blah, all of those things in place. That didn't exist 2 years ago. It took a good 18 months to get it there. And it's a habit of the first of the month, certain things occur, a report comes out, the sysadmin team has a month to correct those, and you sort of get into that habit of that. The second sort of layer is ensuring that our remote users have what they need to basically participate in the systems that they need to securely. And then I think, but we're using what I would consider sort of, 15-year-old technology there, which is just having a good VPN implementation. There's nothing exotic about it. It is just a secure way of communicating when you're offsite. And then the last set of technology is those that are our email filtering and some of the content filtering stuff that we do. It's funny that I was accused of turning up the content filtering on the website by our campus newspaper a couple weeks ago, and I had to bring them to my office and show them that the only thing we block are the really, really, really bad things, and which, from a cybersecurity perspective, we have to block anyway. So, but I'm gonna pat myself on the back. We actually got a retraction in the newspaper the following week. So I actually have the newspaper right here, if anybody wants to see it. So we got the retraction, but it's really, it's a multifaceted attack. And again, it's constant. I think the habit that I've had to instill in my staff is it's not a one and done. Prior to me getting here, it was, our annual audit every year, we had to get our financial audit, we had to have all these things done. It's like, why aren't we doing that weekly? Why aren't we doing it monthly? Why aren't we doing it quarterly? And it's that change that's had to occur. And again, it didn't cost us anything to do more. We already had the tools. It was just a matter of setting things up to be scheduled. And again, and then when the report, and whether you're a Nessus fan or a Qualys fan or whatever, go read the report, teach people how to read the report, and focus on the things that are highest risk. And if you simply just do that over time, you create a much more secure posture and platform than you would have, because there's no way that, and prior sysadmins were all about, oh yeah, I got everything covered, everything's patched, everything's configured correctly. And the first time you run it, the answer is no. Especially when the report, and you tell them up front, that report's going to be 200 pages long, and you're going to cry because you think all of these things are set up correctly, and they're not. And I'm looking at Catherine right now. I think you and I are on the exact same page. And again, it has to become part of, especially the IT people, the back office stuff has to be a habit. It has to be a priority, because if it's not a priority, it won't get done. And if it doesn't get done, is the day you're gonna regret that.
There's a question that came out from a gentleman. He actually left, but I want to make sure we touch on this too before anybody else has to jump off based onto their scheduling. And that is obviously declining budgets. How is that impacting and compromising our ability to keep this cyber awareness? So if I may, on our college. Again, like I say, we're a small college, so COVID impacted us greatly. And like you, Catherine, we're not going to have our students back on campus, let alone staff, until September. So, you know, my fishing is going to, again, start up back in September. I do, on a monthly basis, take the latest and greatest phishing scam that's in the wild. And I send that out to all staff to say, hey, FYI, this is out there, just be aware. We do the typical VPN. So we're using existing technology to mitigate and monitor, for metric purposes, cybersecurity. So we use tools like, you know, Active Directory. We use products from Manage Engine to do AD audit. We use, which from a cost perspective was expensive this year, but we were able to talk the vendor down and give us a slight reprieve because everybody was suffering. So, and they got it. But we ended up a couple of years back swapping out our desktop antivirus for an AI by a company called Cylance, CYLANCE. That reduced numerous man hours and having to deal with both malware and viruses attacking the desktop. And basically, I just didn't have to have any anti-Trojan applications on the desktop whatsoever. So that just saved licensing right there. We went there, and then we made sure that we upped our game on the email filtering. So we upped that. So my staff and I we haven't had to deal with a reimage or a malware attack in what, 2-3 years on any of the desktops whatsoever. And because the Cylance product is cloud-based, for us, it means while these people are remote, they are still protected because it goes by the hash that's kept and compared in the cloud. So monetary wise, I luckily, even though we were crippled, so to speak, like there was a freeze on budget, my existing technology was in place, whereas I didn't have to worry that much. It was more from an education and still keeping people aware, and then still doing the monitoring, still, you know, logging in with the switches and the firewall, et cetera. Catherine, what about yourself?
We already had most of our current security stack procured by before the real COVID budget crisis hit. And things stabilized budget-wise pretty quickly, but no one's exactly passing out money. What's top of mind looking forward for us right now and to return to more normal operations was the Department of Education's Dear Colleague letter saying that they want to start applying the controlled unclassified information standard to student financial aid data. As the couple 100-page standard security standards document that goes along with that is pretty darn impressive to read. And I've told our financial people that I've reached the point where I can't just throw tools at it anymore. My limiting factor now is staff. That we are, even with the AI monitoring we're doing, even with the machine learning algorithms that are filtering out most of the noise, we're going to have a really difficult time staying ahead of these changes in standards and implementing the changes required to meet these standards, be they stuff coming from NIH, which is most of our grant money, or this lovely idea from the Department of Education, that just giving me more money to buy tools will not help me. I need staff time. And that's critical. And thankfully, I feel I'm starting to get through on that by repeating that over and over and over again. But I also haven't seen what my fiscal 22 budget looks like yet.
All right, so let me ask this question, and this is a question for anybody out there who's listening. So this is what I subscribe to at our institutions. It's a magazine called Pen Test, and there's another one called eForensic, and then one called Hacking. And they're expensive, you know, but, you know, we warrant it by expressing the need, you know, for the why. But the reason I bring up this particular one is the March particular volume talked about creating your own pen test lab. So the question is, how many of you are, because of either COVID budgeting restraints or just because in general, your school limits how the money can be utilized because there's fiber needs to go in. So there's something that's a new switch needs to go in. So some things take a back burner. How many of you, perchance, are looking to use open source or have been using open source as a means of doing your cybersecurity? Now, granted, staffing is an issue, and Catherine and I face that same problem myself. We have a very small staff. We only have 3, including myself. So the question is, how many of you rely on that? Anybody? I'm just curious.
We are.
Okay. Can you give an example of how you're utilizing open source to help you?
Oh, as part of the automated inventory of things, we're looking at deploying OS Query as an open source platform,
Okay.
just so to help us meet the inventory standards that are in most regs. And we're looking at possibly doing our internal east-west network traffic monitoring using an open source suite as opposed to the myriad of very expensive vendor options. And the balancing act for us is figuring out, yes, my security team are very clever hacker type admins, but how much of their time do I want them spending on managing the tooling versus managing the results from the tooling? And that's a really fine balance to try to work out.
We've had similar discussions of balancing, again, like on the identity side, we're talking to a vendor right now, and part of the calculation there is it reduces our staffing requirement in our sysadmin side, because we basically have a very manual process today, and moving to a more automated one as one person retired and we didn't fill that position, that expense or that cost of the person will cover the cost of the solution. And the question is, do we get to a better spot that way? And the answer is yes, and it potentially is a break-even kind of thing. So that's part of the sell. Sometimes is I'm trading off for what was done manually and has been for 25 years to an automated solution, but in doing so, I'm giving up that position. So
again, one of the things we looked at is we looked at something to automate. So Splunk, for example, came into the question, but Splunk is an expensive product. So we've actually, as of last year, are implementing Security Onion because it uses that. And again, there's an education, even for me, there's still a learning curve. But out of curiosity, with the tools still in place, I guess the question is it when it really boils down to, do we have enough hours in the time to do proper cyber awareness? Because we all have staff that are handling help desk, servers, CRMs, etc. Are we doing a proper job? Catherine, you seem like you had an answer already.
Well, I was going to come out and say that we're not. And
Okay.
that's an issue that I tried to highlight in the cybersecurity briefing for our president and her senior executives, was that this is a gap we know we have. And it's one that, the answer is simple. Well, just do that. And with whom?
Right.
And I've been just trying to help the people at the top of the org chart understand that's where the budget crunch has really hurt us, is when we're spending 85 to 90% of our time keeping the lights on and maintaining current service levels. That doesn't give us a lot of headroom to work on improvements and even addressing technical debt. So I would love to be the recipient of enough funding to start working on that end user education piece a lot more firmly, because no matter how much technology I deploy, all it takes is one miss to land on a sensitive desktop.
Yeah.
At that point, the person opening that message is the last line of defense, and I need to make sure that they're equipped to be able to handle that instance successfully.
So Elmore had asked, like, it looks like, we talk about the users, but what about technology? I still always come around no matter what you have for technology, whether it's new or old, it's still a matter of, is it being used properly? So I'll ask each of you, and then a question to some of the folks that are sitting on the side. What is your weakest link in your cybersecurity? Without giving anything up, just like, what is it? Is it your, part-time user? Stephen, you want to start that one off?
Trying to think of a polite way to say this. It's a core set of users that no matter how often we provide in-person, direct, indirect, campaign-based information, they still don't get it. And part of it is just they just don't get it, and it's not part of their job. And they don't think, and part of it is, put your mind put your head in the mind of the attacker. What are they trying to get you to do? And oftentimes that question comes after they've clicked the link, and realized that it didn't do what they thought it was going to do. And then they call up the help desk and say, I did something I probably shouldn't have done. It's usually the first statement. And then you begin the process from there. And so that's the I think the reality for us and any large institution. We're not large, but any group of people, there are people that get it and are very in tune with what the possibilities are, and then there are those who just don't. And as I'm saying this, I'm thinking of an incident we had not too long ago where it's like, the fact that why did that not register as a problem, what they were about to do? And they didn't think that way. But I've been personally involved with this individual on a number of occasions and been very clear about, what the risks are and things like that. And so there is a subset of people that is your weakest link.
What about you, Catherine?
Well, I have Stephen's problem, and I also have structural budgetary issues throughout the university where people will hang on to computers until they literally fall apart. There's never a refresh budget to keep them up to date. So every time Microsoft ends support for an operating system, I will spend the next year to 2 years going through and literally begging people to please upgrade that version of Windows to something else. And their usual response back to me is, well, why doesn't IT just buy me a new computer? So keeping helping the have-nots on campus keep up-to-date technology stacks that we can secure and monitor appropriately is especially challenging. The rich professional schools, they're no problem. They get new stuff all the time, but that's not everybody's budgeted the same way.
We've had that budget conversation as well. I've broken it down. A very good exercise is breaking it down, the cost of the computer and the software and Office and and Box and all these other tools on a monthly basis. And at that point, you're really talking, Microsoft 365 is, I don't remember what it's like, $1.14 per user per month kind of thing for us. And it's weird because at that level, people start getting into saying it's kind of a no-brainer. Why are we not spending the money on this? The interesting question, and it only happened to me once, where we had on basically an information assurance policy that says below a certain level, you have till a certain date to get to the current level. And if you don't, we will take you off the network. And there was one organization that didn't, well, that's never going to happen because it's never happened before. And we basically kicked off an entire organization off the network. They immediately, the head of that organization called the chief of staff, of course, and thought that the chief of staff was going to back down and tell us to put them back on, and he didn't, which I thought was like one of the only times of executive political fortitude I've seen in a long time, which is like, no, the policy is, you chose not to abide by the policy. The policy stated the consequences. I don't see what the problem is here, but that doesn't happen very often.
No.
So
we have a similar policy, and I try very hard not to get to the last step of execution on it. If for no other reason than my poor help desk just melts under the calls.
Which is an interesting thing. You mentioned liability, but then there's liability insurance that an institution has to pay. So I know for our standpoint, that came up for cybersecurity insurance with our college. And one of the things that at least we were able to do is show that we did have a policy in play. We were able to show what the process was, what applications were being used, how often were the testings, et cetera. Again, could it be better? I'd love to be a bigger institution to have, like I said, Splunk, for example. But again, we use open source software when we can, when we know it gives me the same level of information that I would still get paying, $5,000, $8,000, $12,000. So for example, the phishing campaign, you could go out and do that per user, but it can get expensive. So we use GoFish as an open source phishing server. We use Kali as a VM to do our internal pest testing, and we use Backbox as well for monitoring. And then the Security Onion we use obviously for the log file and doing the queries against the log files across all the switches and the firewall, et cetera. That's how we handle that. But it still comes down to, as much as I have all that, my biggest worry is, and that's that nagging that's always there in the back, is again, it's the user. It's the only part that doesn't make me go completely insane is I do have that AI sitting on the desktop hoping that it's doing its job. But my weakest link to cybersecurity is ultimately for me the user. And it's both, and it's all levels. Last year, we had a couple of people get an email from the president saying, would you do me a huge favor? Could you pick up a gift card from Lowe's for $250 for me and mail it to me here? And people were almost ready to do that. And it was the same thing. His office is right next to the finance department. Why would he not just literally take 10 steps and ask for it there? And it was amazing the number of people that responded to that. I was just baffled at that. And at the same time, the president himself received an email from Bank of America. Because he has a Bank of America, he almost clicked on it, and he literally admitted he spent a minute or two looking at the email thinking he hadn't done any activity for the last couple of weeks. And he's just forwarded me the email. And I'm thinking, yes. And again, one of the things I'm always educating is, doing the typical thing. No one's going to ask you to change your password in an email. No one's going to ask you for all this information right off the bat. It's the same old thing that we all know what to do. But I can't tell you how many times I always tell people to take their mouse and highlight, hover over the link to show that it's not going to Bank of America. It's going to abcrs.ru, that Russian server. And for me, I'm in the same boat, Stephen, where I have that one or two people that are always amazed and like, wow, I just learned something new. And it's like, well, I told you this 3 months ago, and you said the same thing 3 months ago. And they're just excited to be relearning this information 3 months later. I don't know. I don't think from a security standpoint, that is one thing you'll ever solve. I think not just from an educational institution standpoint, I think any company will ever solve is how to get your users to a level where they understand that they have to be careful what they click on.
One thing, and I don't know what time-wise, we did find out recently that if we implement MFA on our high-risk systems across the board, that our cybersecurity insurance will go down. And so part of my my business case for the CFO for implementing a couple things is there is some hard dollar savings on the other side. So that offsets not all, but some of the cost for doing that. So
we've used the renewal quote from our cyber insurance provider to help drive a few security initiatives. And hey, I think we can recoup this part of the upcharge if we do X. We've used that strategy before. And it's my understanding that the insurers are getting tired of paying out ransomware and are
Yep.
starting to seriously look askance if you're not doing quite a few of those practices like MFA.
Is there, those, I saw your hand raised, Elmore, just a quick question. For those that are sitting on the side there that have been listening in, have there any questions that you would ask regarding the topic, whether it's how do you maintain cybersecurity with budgetary constraints, or how do you maintain it from a remote user standpoint? Any questions from anybody? Okay, Elmore, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to make a brief comment. One thing we haven't said is, and I think Steve came close to this, is sort of the unique academic mindset that sits out there. And I think the problems here are not unlike they are in many other places. I think back, for example, to my experience as a dean and having to shut down international travel operations at 3 different institutions, not shut down the operations, but shut down the faculty members' development of trips when they weren't abiding by the systems that were being put in place to control that, either at the college level or the university level. And in a sense, the same kind of thing happened there as did with computers. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when I got my first computer, and that we were scrambling and certain departments were putting together their first local area networks and things of that sort. It was an entrepreneurial endeavor that was good about it. But at some point, the problems come back. That happened with international travel programs. I think it's the same thing here. And academicians, sort of have that belief that, they are licensed to do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And that is a bit of the challenge that is there in this situation.
It certainly complicates security that people feel is intrusive, or just it triggers certain opinions. But working within the shared governance model of my institution has definitely slowed down a few of our initiatives, but at the same time, I think it was worth the delays just to help make sure that it wouldn't turn into open revolt against certain things we wanted to do. The one we turned on really without a lot of prior notice was the attachment detonation. And yeah, it was a solid month of hate mail in my inbox about that one. But I very quickly got metrics I could show about how many attachments we weren't delivering that would have caused problems. But you're right. I mean, academicians see themselves largely as independent contractors who don't want to be bothered with that trivial stuff that Central's supposed to be taking care of for them. And that's definitely a challenge, especially cybersecurity researchers. They're real fun to work with.
Yeah. It's funny that, I don't know, again, the going off and buying iTunes gift cards or Visa gift cards is kind of like, that's the lowest thing I'm worried about, because that's somebody, either the college or somebody's going to be out of pocket some money, but it really doesn't put the institution at sort of inherent risk. The difference, the stopping point between one of our monks going and buying $600 Visa gift cards and not doing it was the 16 or 17-year-old clerk at the CVS down the street from the college, who basically said, "Hey, Father, why are you doing this?" And he basically said, "Well, I got an email from somebody," and the kid basically said, "No, it didn't happen. I see this all the time." He's basically saying to, don't buy it from the store. You're maybe because he's a Benedictine monk in his habit in a CVS is part of it. But the fact is that it was a 16-year-old saying, "No, this is stupid. It's not real," got him to think that he shouldn't do it. And he felt very embarrassed afterwards. "Yeah, I should have known," is what he said. But it's like, but they're very trusting people, as most people are. And that's part of the problem.
Yeah, we've had the exact same scenario where the clerk at the Walgreens told the graduate teaching assistant, "You're being scammed. Don't do this."
We're running up about 5 minutes on the hour. Is there any questions that people would like to have asked and answered? Otherwise, I know Tom's very good at sending out a survey after this. And obviously, if there's any additional aspects of cybersecurity we'd like to maybe have another meetup on, but be particular with, we can obviously do that. Any questions? All right. Well, with that said, I'm going to let Nuno have some closing remarks.
Hey, thanks, James. Thanks, everybody, for joining. My name is Nuno Kuto. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Meetup group. And it's nice to see you all joining again. We do this on a monthly basis or so, and we just try to bring people together and to have discussions like this. We never try to sell anything, even though I am the founder of a company that does consulting for higher ed, but we never try to sell anything. We just want to be helpful. We certainly encourage you, if you want to reach out to us for any sort of introductions, we're happy to do that. We've built, I think at this point, it's over 550 people or so that are part of the meetup, and a lot of them are very high level people. So we're happy to make introductions. As James said, if there's a particular topic that you'd like us to put a meetup together around, that would be of help. If you want to be a panelist, whatever we can do to help, we're happy to do that. So we've had various types of formats, including us leading a discussion. Sometimes a CIO from a school leads a discussion. So we're happy to make that happen. So, any other comments from anyone in the meetup group or the organizing committee? No.
I mean, from my end, I think James covered it pretty well, but I'll just reiterate one more time. We'll be sending out a questionnaire after the meetup, as well as some links to materials that were mentioned during the conversation. And at that point, you guys can tell us how we did and let us know what topics for conversation you'd like to hear at upcoming meetups.
Sounds good. It was, I enjoyed the conversation. I hope those who attended did. We thank you very much for your time. We know it's precious. And I look forward to seeing all you guys at the next one.
Absolutely. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.